Morena.
Morena.
Welcome to the City Delivery Committee workshop meeting of Thursday the 11th September 2025. In terms of health and safety, if the alarm sounds, please make your way to the nearest emergency exit. The assembly point is down Devonport Road. Please be aware this meeting is being live streamed and the video will be publicly available on YouTube. Members, can you please, members and TCC staff, please remember to speak clearly into the microphone. And actually we can only have one speaker at a time because technology has stopped anything else happening. Please silence your mobile phones. Could I ask Councillor Rolleston for an opening karakia, please?
Morena tātou. Kia noi tātou. Tui runga, tui raro, tui roto, tui waho, tui te here tangata karongo te akarongo te pō, nau mai te i, te wē te mana te tapu, pau ki roto ki a mātou mō tēnei ata, ko i ara e rongo, whakiriraki ki runga, turu whakamaua ki a tīna. Haumi e, hui e.
Hai.
Ki e.
Kia ora. Apologies, has Kev managed to come online? He was trying to. And we've got an apology. So at the moment, an apology from Kev and from Councillor Schuler and Councillor Kurak. I'm happy to move that. Can I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Rolleston. All those in favour? So she's probably not. She's an apology for lateness because she's trying to get online. Thank you, Councillor Baker. Can I ask if there's any declaration of conflict of interest for the meeting? There being none, thank you. So this is the City Delivery Committee workshop, the prioritisation framework. So welcome to our TCC staff, James Woodward, Catherine Sharplin and Susan. Knew I was going to get it wrong. Welcome. So we will ask you to take us through that. Thank you.
Thank you. Through the chair. So what we'll start off with, I'll just pass over to Catherine. She'll just frame up, I guess, the financial position and kind of, I guess, where we're at and what the LTP in its current state looks like. And then we'll whip through that and then work through, I guess, prioritisation, how do you go about it, considerations to be made, and I guess the role of governance in that space. So, yeah, I'll pass to Catherine now.
Thank you. So Finance always likes to jump in at the beginning of a capital prioritisation just to say there are limits. We can't afford to do everything that we would identify, and hence you are asking for that way of approaching prioritisation. But we thought it'd be helpful just to give that high-level framing. So we like to draw indicative lines on a graph for you to say this is your maximum each year. That can only ever be indicative because until we actually get actual projects, actual decisions about rates revenue, the kind of subsidies that come in, that will change, and the timing of the capital program of the 10 years, it will change what you could afford to do each year. So just acknowledging that when we're drawing or giving you these lines and limits, they are indicative averages, and you may be able to pop up above that average in a year, but that would mean you'd have to claw it back in a later year, etc. So the whole purpose of that annual plan and long-term plan is that we have a big corporate planning model, and all that relationship and all that detail gets put through the model to actually drop out at the bottom, rates, requirements, what your debt ends up at. So just important to frame that at the beginning, that these are just indicative numbers and that they are driven mainly by this balance between debt and revenue and council's desire of where you want to be on those matters. So based on what we've got now in the system and what we've presented through the Waters Service Delivery Plan of the kind of capital that is being indicated for Waters, we're saying that we're recommending you work to a maximum capital of between 480 to 500 million. average, and that will, if you look at take off the Waters numbers, because Waters would be in a CCO, or likely in a CCO after next year, then you would have an average of around 300 to 310 million left for the rest of council. So those are just high-level framing numbers, and if additional, and that's based on, I think we said, assuming about 35 million of capital. So if specific deals or arrangements or large roading projects with a lot of NZTA subsidy come in, then that gives you more flexibility. We also just tried to do a little bit of a what if for you at this stage. So that 300 to 310 was based on the maximum rates being the rates increases in the LTP financial strategy. If you were to look at lower rates increases, and we just ran a very high level, say 7.5%, you would have to drop your per annum capital. So for the rest of council, from that 300 to 310 down to about 280. So it just gives you kind of a rule of thumb of what those pressures might be, unless you can get additional external revenues is really the thing. The other thing that we are noticing is featuring at the moment is the economic downturn and how that is affecting growth and growth revenue. So again, that drives into the level of debt that you're carrying for a period, because some of that revenue isn't flowing through as quickly as you'd like. And then this last graph on both growth debt was requested by Councillor Crowther, but it's quite an interesting story, because what it's showing you is, including Waters, yes, growth debt is the blue and orange chunks in that graph, and they're reasonably significant in terms of your total debt. They sit mainly with Waters. So when you're looking at the rest of council from July 2027, you have much lower growth debt and therefore also much lower growth revenue in there. That was just for information. So pass over to Susan.
For the growth debt, just following up on the extra information you'd sent through in terms of the divvying up of growth, level of service, renewals, and then growth and level of service. So when you come to do those kind of graphs or analyses, how do you, if you don't have the numbers for the teasing apart the combined growth and level of service, how do you factor that into the analysis of growth debt or growth capex, etc.? So
again, this is flows through the corporate planning model, because all these relationships are complex. So the capital projects are identified at an individual level with their funding, assessed funding. And the way growth works is we run specific growth reserves for each growth area. So Waters in Pies Par will have its own growth reserve. And as we collect DCs, revenue flows into that reserve. As we pay capital, which actually happens first, costs flow out of that. And so the debt is built up from all those reserves into a number that is growth debt. So if you look in the system, there's just an enormous amount of reserve movement information that drives into that debt. So, but it flows from the projects, and we've sent you that high level. If anyone wants to look at the large amount of data that gets dumped out on the movements in the reserves.
No, I don't know if I conveyed the question. The question is, if you have, say you have a project and it's 10 million for growth and 5 million for level of service, that's straightforward. But when you have a project that's 15 million growth and level of service, I'd like to know, what are we going to expect to get back from, putting it simply, like from growth, from developers, from DCs, and how do you tease apart that 15 million if it's clumped together as growth and level of service? And I guess I'm my memory goes back, and I guess direction from me to the CE is that I have a bit of an allergic reaction to this, because it was 4.5 years ago, when we had a commissioner saying, I don't like the graph, which teases apart growth and level of service because it's not telling the narrative that we want to tell. And yeah, and that, to me, that's just like dishonest. And it completely obfuscated what the messaging should have been to our community at the time. And it's come back to haunt us many times since we've been on council. So I just think we need to get this absolutely clear right from the start. Are we able to tease apart level of service and growth?
So Susan can give you some detail about the projects, but just to be clear, when we do have to report under the sort of financial regulations, we have to report in the funding impact statement whether it's growth, level of service or renewals, but very few projects are 100% of anything. And so if you spend 50% on growth and 50% on level of service, then under our the chosen interpretation, it becomes a growth project. So what the commissioners were saying, but that isn't conveying the correct information. We're not going to ever get revenue for 100% of that project. So how can we provide some better information, because people are saying all we're doing in this community is growth, but we're doing Tamanga an upgrade and improving level of service in terms of discharge to water. That's a level of service. The upgrade to have more capacity for growth is growth. And so they said, can you break that down and find those projects that we are saying to the community are not only for the people who are coming, they are for level of service now. So that's why that extra category was given. It provides more information, not less. Did you want to add anything, Susan?
I was just going to say that there is a funding stack slide that we'll come to later, which portrays the LTP funding stack, and we are going through a process over the next couple of weeks of updating our planning model in preparation for the draft 27 annual plan, and after that we can get you absolutely that project by project view, if you want to see that, of the funding that underpins each and every project.
I mean, I'm not too worried about, at the moment, the project, but I'm wanting the principle to be, and I remember what happened in that meeting was that Stephen Selwood was overruled, and the audit office said that it had to be in the plan. He asked for it to be pulled out, and he asked you, Marty, and Audit New Zealand overruled that and said that could not be the case, and it went into the 2021 or whatever one it was. There might have been the amended 2021 plan, whichever one. And that was a big deal out there because it completely obfuscated the key issue. So to me, I would like to see both. I would like to see the graph and the spreadsheet that shows the high-level 3 groups, and then also the one that shows 4. They both tell their own story. They're both important. But we keep getting back now to what has never happened on this council until the commissioners came, and it doesn't happen on most other councils. And this is the key information, because we can explain to the community this is not just a growth one. What we have to explain, what the community are saying to us, some of us, is what about all this unfunded growth from the, growth is not paying for growth, and we're hiding that. And it needs to be very explicit as to what growth is there, because otherwise we get these distorted numbers that I now are able to understand from last year, which it's now explained to me, but that's not the accurate perception of what's happened here. I'm not speaking to this.
But we're confusing two things. A growth project is because it's predominantly growth. That's not listed in the LTP that is a growth project. Every project is broken down to growth, level of service, and renewals, and that's what goes into the LTP. So growth debt is the growth portion of a project that then that debt is put into the LTP, and that's what we're seeing here. Is that?
I understand how it works. I'm saying I would like both sets of numbers, and I think that should be an absolute principle of this council, especially if we're sticking to growth pays for growth, that we're very transparent around those, and definitely put in the other ones if you're able to do that, or you're more easily able to do that by the sounds of it. But to me, we need both those sets of numbers all the time, so we can actually tease out those for different purposes. Like I say, they both tell their own story, but the one is absolutely a critical story, and we're not getting that.
Can we just take that offline, and, because I don't know if we're all 100% understanding your request, can we just take it offline? But are we taking actions from workshops? Can we put an action on the delivery committee that we are, Glenn, if you put your words together for an action, just so we make sure we don't, because I can hear the concern, but we probably do need to move on.
Well, I think the finance team know, presumably you have memories back to what was around it. Yeah, yeah. No, I just mean in terms of the wording you said. You don't want the wording? Okay. Okay.
So this is just some simple graphs just showing this financial year's, I guess, breakdown of projects, where they're at in terms of their status, noting, that green wedge, the grey wedge and the blue wedge are largely committed through the renewals program, what's committed through the waters service delivery plan, and then what's actually out there being constructed. If you look ahead to FY27, obviously that reduces down, and that's where your level of influence is. So when we talk about prioritisation, we get into the process of it. The wedge of what you can prioritise does change over time. It's just important to have that in the background, and we go through that process of identifying what's committed, confirming that, and then working through later on.
So, sorry, James, what's the so what of the slide? It's pretty, but what am I reading from it?
It's just demonstrating, I guess, the level of influence you have when you're prioritising. So you're not prioritising 500 million, for example. A lot of the stuff's already in train and committed. What you're focusing your effort on is what you can influence and change, which is the balance of what's not committed. Just noting as well that blue wedge, it's part of that water services delivery plan, that's kind of locked in, so that impacts what you have available. I guess it's important to note for FY27, there's a number there for 634. We're talking about your limits about 500, so you've got to carve out 134 million to remain in that threshold, and that's kind of, what does that process look like?
And are renewals considered able to prioritise? Because they're quite a big wedge on the piece of paper we've got, and we don't really hear much. We just sort of hear that renewals have to happen, but I don't think I'd be able to say what have we approved on renewals, and what are the policies and principles behind how often we renew things.
So generally it's part of the LTP process. There's asset management plans that will be presented that drives the renewal program, and those are validated and endorsed by governance, and that sets, I guess, that grey wedge in terms of that program of work. I guess from an in principle position, it's that what level are you accepting in terms of maintaining existing assets, because that's fundamentally what it's for, maintaining existing levels of service.
So through you, Chair, through the annual plan last time round, you adopted some principles, and one of those was looking after what we've got, which effectively is the renewals principle.
And I just had a little example where 3 lights in my street were renewed 10 years before their normal full-time life. So I raised the question, why would we be doing that? And there was 16 reasons given to do that, but I just thought, well, that's looking after your assets is fine. I know I've been in other organisations where we say laptops are only meant to last 3 years, but you can actually make them last 4 years quite easily. So if you're actually, those are the principles that I'd like to make sure we do know and understand what principles we are using or basing our spending on, if we're talking about 50 or 60 million a year on renewals.
Yeah, so just doubling down on what I said before, there's a bit of work to do, I guess, for the annual plan 26-27 to drive down what's there currently in the system. From a staff point of view, there's a lot of work that goes on around recash flowing stuff to make sure it's aligning in terms of expected time frame, so that number will change. but there will be a requirement to go, well, what's the residual number, what number do you get it down to, and then so what does that process look like, and how do you go about balancing, I guess, all the different needs and outcomes that you want to deliver. I guess the other thing as well to consider through this is you've got an LTP coming up, and so what's committed through the annual plan will play through the LTP, so just making sure that those relationships are really clear, and I guess that LTP process, having that discussion as early as possible is probably advised. It would really help staff actually guide the program.
So just following on from the conversation earlier about the funding stack, so that graph there just is put in there to give you an appreciation over the last 8 years of the LTP, what that funding stack looked like. So you'll see the large majority of that is funded through loans. Obviously, there have been a number of significant changes to our funding stack due to NZTA assumptions, IFF no longer funding Te Manawataki, and other subsidies and grants, including IAF, which is still subject to confirmation. So when we update for the draft 27 annual plan program, which we will be presenting back to you in October, we will be able to do a refreshed view of that and how it compares. But we would be expecting that loan portion to look slightly larger the next time we present this to you. And then big rocks. So some of you may recall back last December, as we were leading into the 26th annual plan, I presented a graph to you all of some of those chunkier programs of works. And I have just circulated that graph to make it hopefully a bit easier for you to read. This here is just a summarised version, so you'll be able to drill down and see this table does include the Three Waters program. The graph does not. So it's broken down by your sort of transport and city centre big rocks. If you're focusing on the 27 annual plan, this is the current corporate planning model. We have yet to go out to the business and just confirm the realism around the deliverability of those numbers. So there will be a bit of movement when we present back to you. But yeah, 100 million a piece for transportation big rocks and city centre big rocks. Spaces and places about half that. And then those two lines down the bottom, that's where you do have more of that level of influence, as James was discussing. And then if we, do you have a question? Sorry.
So this is all assuming that they all of these projects will have a contingency, and the contingency is all used. So this is assuming this is the full cost, the full budget that's been allocated or been approved on projects.
Correct. Bearing in mind a lot of those contingency budgets sit out towards the tail end of this. So yeah.
So I know Te Manawataki was previously anticipated to be IFF funded. Was Memorial Park development looking like it was going to be IFF funded as well at the time, or was that always going to be on balance sheet?
That was not. That was going to be on balance sheet.
Okay.
It does have some renewals assumptions and DC assumptions, which will all be subject to future decisions that you make on that project. Yeah. Memorial Park Aquatic, that is sitting in there still as quite a large budget per the LTP, and I understand there's probably an inclination to want to get that down to a lower number. So that hasn't yet been reflected in here, but it will do once your decisions are made. So yeah, just kind of summarising what this chart is showing. So there is that it's a fairly stable renewal spend year on year, so excluding waters sits around 50 million per annum. Then we've got all of those yellow shades, which are the transportation big rocks, the orange shades being the city centre and the green being spaces and places. And we can just see there is that huge wedge just sitting above that 300 mil target limit. That, yeah, even though there is a bit of work for the business to do in terms of refining what the 27-year program looks like, there is still going to be a significant amount of prioritisation work for this council to do.
Sorry, can we back up one slide? Because I had a question and sort of got skipped
yes.
over. I don't know whether this is for Marty or whether it's for James. Three Waters, biggest rock we got on the list. We don't seem to have much vision of what that involves, and we certainly haven't had any discussions around what might be dropped out of that part of the capital program. Is that something that we should get better vision on, do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's no problem with providing the detail for the current financial year spend and future financial years spend. I think when we provide the information that you might recall that we had numerous conversations, I think, late last year about what that program looked like and the requirement to maintain, and I think actually as part of Local Water's done well, to maintain a certain level of service without actually trying to carve a whole lot of stuff out and leave it for a future CCO. But we can, I think, refresh that information for you and provide it in whatever format you like.
I guess after 3 months, had no idea. After 12 months, got quite a good idea on a lot of the other stuff. But Waters, to me, is a bit of a black hole that we just accept that it's going to roll on. So
I think what we'll do is refresh the information for you. But I think at the time there was a consolidated view and almost an external requirement to maintain a standard level of service and renewals and upgrades and that sort of thing. But I think it's let's revisit and refresh that information so you're aware of what we're spending on an annual basis in that area.
yeah, we may do nothing, but I think our level of understanding needs to grow on what it is at the moment.
So can we record that as an action, please? Thank you very much.
Yeah, I'm conscious also we've got quite a bit of work to do to get that number down for next financial year, and it'll provide an opportunity to dive into Waters as it will with all the others. Despite Glenn, you know, I know that the question is, are we putting enough in there?
Yeah, it's the all necessary. Can we have add to the action, please, Caroline, the what I've sort of asked for before, which is the all necessary infrastructure to meet our infrastructure strategy requirements for each of the three waters. So it'd be good to have them broken down into each of the three, because I know the figure that the other mayors around the Bay of Plenty use is what was presented in the May 2024 Mayoral Forum of 5.7 billion. We're putting in 2.06 or something. So it's to understand how much the difference between 5.7, which I've seen in writing, and 2.06 is quote unquote necessary.
I think we'll put those as two separate actions, please. Thank you.
I see Wally and Kathy sitting in the background. Hopefully, does that all make sense?
So I guess that kind of sums up the financial view and I guess the challenges. And now it's kind of like, well, what do you do to kind of optimise the program? And so I think it's been shared before. There's a big methodology behind in the additional slides. But fundamentally, for an annual plan process, we would identify what's committed as projects. Based on we do a risk assessment on the projects. So wherever there's a critical risk identified, those projects almost at an auto include. So that's level of service or environmental risk, consenting requirements, all that kind of stuff. Then we look at strategic alignment. So we look at the current direction and how projects relate to that, and we score them. Once we've got that information, then it's more of a testing of how that program can actually be delivered. So what is the cost of actually deferring some of the items? Is there a heavy cost, and is there more value in doing them now? Project readiness. So project readiness is more around, is the project in a space where it can proceed? So consents are landed, land is acquired or easements are there, the design is ready to go, all that kind of stuff. And then deliverability is more as, well, if it's all ready to go, can the market actually deliver it? Have we got an experienced team in place to manage that? Is the market capable of delivering that project? That all goes into a pot, and then we generate basically a ranking list. Where it becomes a little bit unstuck sometimes is, I guess, the competing priorities and where projects may not score well, but from a certain view, they should be in the list. So that's where I guess from a methodology point of view, it's never gonna 100% work, but it gives you maybe an 80-20 position, and then you can kind of debate the rest. If you wanted to go into a 100% position, what you'd have to be really conscious of is that if you wanted to include certain projects, you need to change the methodology rather than force feeding them into a ranked list. So that's, I guess, what we've done to date. For an LTP, we'd probably...
Can I just stop you there before you do the next one? So just in terms of that explanation, which is really good, but not very clear from the slide, so some of those, yeah, I know. But just have you got examples of where you've gone back to say, that's the methodology we used, we did decide that it was feasible, we did decide that the market was ready, we did decide we were ready. Was our decision making accurate when it came to actually putting the project in place? Are we actually going back on our decisions and saying, okay, let's in 2 years' time go back and look at how we decided that 2 years ago, and to test whether they're actually the right factors to be using?
I guess it's probably more of a 3-yearly cycle with an LTP. So the LTP... Yep, so the LTP, the biggest part of it is that strategic direction. So what are the key outcomes you want to deliver? What does good look like in terms of measurements?
No, that's not what I'm asking. I'm asking, you've said to us there's some criteria you use in your process. I'm asking, do you go back and make sure those criteria were correct and they did ensure we delivered a project?
Yep, so we revalidate them when we go through this process. So all those questions around the strategic alignment, we moderate and check those. Readiness, we're always checking in terms of the deliverability and I guess the optimism sometimes of some of these programs of work. The business case of the project often gets reviewed as well. So that process is generally an annual one because we always have this challenge of trying to shoehorn too many projects into. So we've got to do it on an annual basis. In terms of, I guess from an LTP perspective, this is kind of the rough time frame. And I understand there'll be some further briefings on the LTP process. For this prioritisation process, that strategic direction is key. So really understanding where governance is coming from, where council is coming from in terms of priorities, key priorities, and I guess working through, well, how do you want to allocate funding to that? Because there's two ways you could do it. You could assign large buckets of money against certain outcomes or portfolios of work, or you could try and measure projects against projects, which becomes really difficult because it's often apples and oranges, and community projects related to infrastructure projects are really hard to compare. So that's, I guess, some considerations in terms of how you go about, well, the work you need to do around that strategic direction, and then I guess the approach of how do you allocate the funding for then staff to react in terms of defining their portfolios. So it's a lot easier to define and prioritise programs within a portfolio than projects against everything else. So that's something, I guess, from a direction point of view. We have the strategic outcomes, we have the action investment plans, which are effectively programs of work, validating those, determining which ones are more important than others, helps staff then prepare the necessary information to come back and have those conversations. If you're willing to, there's a little quick exercise around just understanding, and I guess we have 5 outcomes in the LTP currently. I know there's probably some work being done around kind of validating that, and that may change, but just interested in just a quick exercise, probably take 2 minutes, just individually ranking those outcomes. Alistair can share the notes. Just a ranking of 1 as the highest and 5 as the lowest. Hand them back to Alistair, and then we'll collate it. It's all anonymous, just to kind of demonstrate, do we have a bit of a challenge, or actually is there quite a bit of an alignment? Because that's, I guess, the big crux of the whole process is fundamentally where do we need to spend the money? What's that? Oh, these outcomes. So one's the highest, most important, yep. Yeah, they've got this. It's all on the piece of paper. It's fine. So while you're doing that, I guess there's two, discussion pieces. One is the approach to the annual plan, and what that looks like, and just applying the current kind of methodology. And then there's the long-term plan approach, which is more of a long burn one, but certainly as early as possible, the conversations around strategic direction and priorities, the validation of the action investment plans, key principles around financial boundaries and assumptions, that will help us then define, put into our model how these projects will all kind of score against this process. So I'm happy to take questions, or I can lean into more of the methodology if you'd like to.
So I know it's rare, but I actually had a finance question, and you kind of wrapped that off and I didn't get a chance to ask. Can I ask it now, or do you want it at the end? I may. Going back to slide 6, we had the areas in red, which were either uncommitted or kind of new projects, which to me, reading that seems like that's a real easy first logical place to start when we're needing to cut down from that 630 to 500 or whatever it is, especially for the next financial year. In that big red sum, do we know, or has the organisation been able to measure or quantify the outcome or opportunity loss with cutting whatever those projects are in that, or any sunk costs that may incur for the projects that we would look at cutting?
We can work that out. I guess as part of the process, we can provide that information. So I guess I can leave it there, or we can actually move through the methodology if you'd like in a bit more detail, or we can have a discussion around, like I said, annual plan approach and that long-term approach.
Are there questions from the Councillor Taylor?
Sort of understand the process, your sequential process there. Can you just tell us a little bit about the cost of deferral? Like, I'm getting a kick in the bum at the moment from people in town about deferring some projects, and just understanding how we actually determine what the cost of deferral is.
Yeah, so we generally use a percentage based on what the additional operating cost might be. So if it's an asset that needs to be replaced, what does that look like in terms of OPEX carrying on? If it's commercial related, what's the opportunity cost that's lost in terms of revenue generation? If it's a new project, what is that cost of deferral going to impact in terms of any economic kind of impact? So it's generally quite high level, but it gives us a bit of an indication of, well, if we delay that, what's the danger and what's the cost we'll incur?
Sort of supplementary there, just what sort of weighting and how do we do community outcomes, for example? The project may be deferred and the people miss out.
I guess from a weighting point of view, that's I guess one of the roles here in terms of determining those priorities. What weighting do you want to give to transport outcomes versus community asset outcomes versus housing outcomes? That drives a lot of the kind of model in terms of how projects will score. There's also weighting consideration between outcomes and also risk. So in our current model, it's a 70-30 split. So we take strategic outcomes, how they score, that makes up 70% of the score. And then the critical or the risk factor of that project, that makes up the balance. So you can, within the model, you can start playing around and tweak things, but you'll probably find that most of the projects will still be at the top, despite what you do in terms of trying to weight and change weightings. The most important ones will float up there. It'll probably change the ones more in the middle, and I guess below or above the line, and that's where I guess the discussion becomes how technical do you want to get with it versus an 80-20 approach, and then having that debate around the balance of 20%.
Sorry, so essentially on some of those community outcomes, it's our input that is the key factor there. It's nothing that we try and assess outside of this chamber.
Oh, we'll assess the relationship of the project to a community outcome, but in terms of how that project then would be ranked, it comes down to the weightings that, you could go 20% on each of them. That makes life pretty easy, but you might find that some are higher or lower.
Yeah, just around the prioritisation methodology, so it's done both there. I think you've just slightly touched on it, but is it quite a is it a bit of a feel exercise for the staff, or is there a framework there that you can plug all the projects in and it spits out the projects in order of ranking at the moment?
So it's all kind of contained within a spreadsheet, which is quite large. That drives the list. For projects that are further out in their life cycle in terms of LTP, some of the information there is limited, so you've got to make a series of assumptions in terms of how they score. Certainly, earlier on, it's a lot easier to score the projects, particularly when you're scoring them around the readiness and deliverability, because they're way more advanced. The other one is, The other one is around the commitment. So the committed projects and the risk projects, we normally take approach of if they fit that threshold, we don't actually score them. So we're just focusing our effort on if we get past the committed projects, we determine what projects are critical from a risk point of view, they drop off, and we just focus our effort on the balance of the program and score them. So you'd see in the model that a lot of projects are blank because they're already under construction. The effort going into that is negligible in terms of, but it's a 1,000+ line type spreadsheet with 50+ columns.
Do we have any idea in the big rocks what our contingency is across those projects?
We do. I can't provide it right now, but we have that information available. That's all built into LTP, and I guess we've got another session after this where we'll probably have a bit more discussion around contingency.
And that, an idea of that would be good for us to have. It's something that we're trying to weigh up when we are prioritising what we want to do, because we're going to drive some value for money. We want to know what is already allocated as contingency, therefore hopefully not having to be used. But there's quite a lot of conversations we want to have in terms of what the total cost of projects approved and unapproved are, and the contingency does play into that very much.
Yeah, so I mean, on average across the program, it's probably 20%, 25% contingency, but that's over a 10-year period. And certainly projects in later years that have not advanced through design have to make large assumptions because you've still got to define scope. But yeah, we've got another workshop where we'll work through that one.
And I just suggest for the workshop that we do have some specifics so we can really understand why 25 was put in versus 17 or 9 or whatever we use.
Sorry, just while we're touching on community outcomes and the prioritisation methodology, definitely don't disagree with some of the metrics that you use to rank around our strategic alignment. Sorry, my computer's playing up, so finances and risk. But if we've just got this big machine spitting out that data, with all of that in play, what we're probably missing is that real important equity lens to it all, because it's going to then, depending on what's ready and what isn't, one ward could probably get a lot more investment by virtue of how far along a project is compared to another. And I think that's an important governance decision or lens that we need to have over some of this decision making. So I don't know if it's an action to consider and it's a 51st line in your 1,000 lines of Excels, but I think it would be really helpful for us if you guys had some equity assessments in place, so we can make some of those assessments, and even if they're broken down by ward, if possible, just so we're making balanced decisions.
So this is just at the end of the pack, but these are kind of other items that we capture within the data, or looking to capture. Some of it we haven't actually got available, but we'll work through that for the LTP. And geographical information, for example, to get that ward view is really important. And then relationships to other, I guess, things going on. So we start to pull that out and provide that information. So it gives you a bit more of a full picture of how it links to other kind of high-ranking priorities, for example, the TSP program, what projects have been potentially looking at going through other kind of governance groups, for example, UNISAR or different city regional deal stuff, and action investment plan links. So yeah, there's a lot of data and we've still got a bit of work to do to capture all of that, but certainly giving, I guess, a wide-ranging view of how everything interfaces. Yeah, we can respond to that. So we're just going to put up the results of the survey. And it's just to demonstrate, I guess, the challenge. And this is, obviously, we're not going to take this away and use it, but it's more of a, I guess, a think piece to go for us as an organisation and for us to start prioritising, getting that clarity of directions, really important. Oh, I don't have. Oh, sorry. Oh. So I guess, yeah, it's just an example. I think there's some further conversations to have in this space around what this looks like, but I guess it does demonstrate where there's maybe a little bit of alignment, and then where maybe there's a bit of... Lower's better. Yeah, lower's better, yep, where there's a bit of difference. So, yeah, that's just something to take away, I guess, and, through probably more the Jeremys of the world and Josh's with the LTP, just kind of having that conversation as early as possible.
So through you, Madam Chair, just from that starting to build the LTP world, what we see from the background there is that no single outcome's got more than 3 people preferring it as the top one.
Who's H? Who has everything ranked as ones?
One person cheated. Well, somebody has not played the role, but okay. And some of the key ones there, you've got some people ranking transport 1 and some people ranking it 5, for instance. So it's a big conversation to have amongst yourselves as to where the priorities fit. And we can help facilitate some of those conversations, perhaps. That's a conversation for you guys. But as far as, so this is when James talks about the prioritisation stuff. For instance, we'll end up with 5 categories for every project, saying how does it fit with the community outcomes. Understanding which of those community outcomes are more important to you helps us then moderate or weight those factors in the spreadsheet. If we weight the factors differently, the results become different and the list of 1,000 projects is in a different order. So the prioritisation can be scientific, but it's always ever pseudoscience based on what we put into it. And
then I think if you add on to that, if we started putting the AIPs as part of that, because these are fundamentally portfolios, and then AIPs under that, and having the same conversation, that would also, I guess, drive a bit of, you know, conversation at your level.
Seeing you and the commissioners made the decision. So the previous elected councils, together, you know, I'm told by the commissioners, that's a quote from the commissioners, there was a joint decision, I was told, was to not move ahead with the sustainability framework and the independent sustainability board. So I guess what I've always been looking for is the rationale for that. So there are a lot of people who saw that as quite an opportunity to address this specific issue. That was what the idea of the elected members was, as I understand it, and Steve was there, so he can comment if he wishes. But, you know, the decision not to do it was based on there would be a sustainability, as a strategic framework that would be put in place. So in my meeting with the commissioners in early 21, that was their rationale. So what has replaced that in terms of as part of the current strategic framework, or is that still for us to deliver?
I think there are two things here, but I'll perhaps pass over to Christine after I've had a first crack at this. So I think you'll find that sustainability is still absolutely part of the strategic framework that exists across the broader council and city outcomes. I think the independent advisory board, if you did you refer to that?
Yes. The independent one that,
correct.
You know, Ganesh.
So that I think lasted about 6 months. And following that, it was viewed by the Commission as another independent group that I guess could provide advice, but didn't necessarily have any decision-making ability, and they felt that the strategic framework that they'd created and consulted with the community to the degree that they did would enable them to make decisions. So, and they made some very, if you like, big decisions in relation to investment and sustainability too, but obviously in recent times that's changed. Hopefully that sums it up. Christine, do you want to?
So yes, and then in the strategic framework under our direction, you'll recall that we've got the kupenga that we worked together with the ragapu on in terms of how we would show how all the outcomes link, and then across the 5 outcomes, which are the ones that you've just prioritised, there's 3 streams or strategies that go across. One of those is sustainability, the other one is te ao Māori, and the third one is working beyond tauranga. Those 3 weave across all the 5 outcomes. And then in addition to that, in the actual strategic direction framework, there were some specific strategies that related to particular areas of sustainability, even though it is woven across all, and that was the Climate Action Investment Plan, the Nature and Biodiversity Action Investment Plan. So that was the approach that was approved by the Commission as the way they would move forward in this area.
I guess.
Thank you. I think we've no, it's because the chair's got the microphone. So I think, Glenn, we've come to the end of our time for this workshop. So I'm going to thank the staff for your time. I think it's proven that there's more conversations we need to have. I think these are really, really big questions. We really want to be able to be knowledgeable and able to support the prioritisation that is happening and that we need to do as we come up to the long-term plan. So thank you for that detail, and obviously we can ask questions on the workshop if we need to, and I will ask Councillor Rolleston for a closing karakia, please.
Tēnā koe, kia noi tātou. Tui runga, tui raro, tui roto, tui waho, karongo te ao, karongo te pō, haumi e, hui e.
And I declare this workshop closed.